Chapter 321. The Guy Who Doesn't Knock. Saruman's petty machinations continued in secret. Yes, in secret. Why didn't you knock? On the tower's top floor, Saruman was hastily tucking his research away, hiding the papers and instruments behind him. He kept his expression blank as the uninvited guest took a seat nearby. "Don't be nervous," Li Wei said. "I'm not here to fight." Li Wei casually looked at the things Saruman had just hidden and asked, "What's that? Mind if I take a look?" "No." "All right. If you have something to say it quickly. As you can see, I'm very busy." Saruman's impatience showed. He had been tied up supervising the orc breeding areas, poring over analyses and practical tests, and checking on subordinates day in and day out. He was already annoyed. "Some of your orcs have escaped." Those words hit like a bomb. Saruman's eyelids twitched, but his face gave no hint of panic. His usual poker face held. "Where? Why wasn't I told?" "North of the Black Land. They almost wandered into my territory." "Oh, those orcs. My men reported that. Didn't I send people to deal with them?" Saruman said in a flat tone, though his heartbeat pounded in his chest. He had to keep some of his accomplishments intact. "Timely, then. Your allies acted quickly." Li Wei's tone was casual, as if making small talk, or perhaps he really was just passing through. He rose suddenly, the heat from his armor making Saruman's throat go dry as he walked past and to the window, surveying Isengard below. "This place is still beautiful. May it always remain so. Look. The clear sky, gardens of green and red, groves of fruit trees, lakes that mirror the heavens and the distant mountains. It must be pleasant to stroll through such surroundings." "Of course." Saruman kept his gaze on his papers and continued to tidy them without looking up. "It's a pity some people don't appreciate it and treat all this as worthless." With a whoosh, Li Wei drew Nemesis, the sword he rarely used. Saruman startled. "What are you doing?" "Nothing." Li Wei glanced at the blade. It gave no light. He swung it twice casually and sheathed it again, as if testing his surroundings. "Be careful. Don't get near my collections. Whether you accidentally knock something over with a careless gesture or your experiments ignite something, don't expect me to forgive that. Don't be suspicious. I respect the fruits of labor and wisdom." Saruman bristled, but tried to remain calm. Li Wei rested a hand on the table beside him. "Armor and swords, I handle mine well. They're my things." He stared at Saruman for a second longer. "I hope you manage your things as carefully as I do." "Heh," Saruman said dryly. "Of course, I can manage my things, whatever they are. By the way, how's your research on the beacon coming along? Any progress after all these years?" The subject changed abruptly. Saruman brightened at the chance to talk about it, though he kept his answers guarded. He spread his fingers in a small, restrained gesture. "A little." "A little?" "Yes, very superficial, but a little." Li Wei tilted his head, glanced at the table, and then looked at Saruman as if to say he didn't believe him. "Believe it or not, it's my private matter. You should be grateful I told you." Li Wei's amusement showed. All right, your private matter. Don't want to discuss it? Fine." Their exchange was short. As Li Wei said, he wasn't there to cause trouble. He was passing through on his way to Rohan. At the tower's window, Saruman watched Li Wei's retreating figure and exhaled. "Gandalf, Li Wei. What a headache." He stepped back into the tower. Gandalf tended to wander but left traces. If he discovered something, Saruman could deal with it. Li Wei, however, was unpredictable, like a wraith who would appear behind you without warning. As an ally, he was dependable, but he was also unnerving. Saruman stopped and pondered for a moment. Why had Li Wei become an ally? Their reasons were complicated. After all, the first time Saruman had seen him, Li Wei had been standing beside Gandalf. From that meeting, this outcome had been set. Shaking off the thought, Saruman returned to his work. Soon, very soon. His progress on the beacon was far more than just a little. "How have you been lately?" At the Golden Hall in Rohan's capital, Li Wei greeted King Theoden. "I have been well, exceptionally well." Theoden came forward warmly, and the two shared a brief embrace. "Seeing you healthy puts me at ease." Li Wei's eyes swept the hall. His gaze made many officials uncomfortable. Some nodded politely, some kept their heads down, and some, afraid of meeting his eyes, looked away entirely. Theoden watched, then asked softly, "Uncle, are you looking for someone?" "Sort of," Li Wei said vaguely, leaving people puzzled. "Perhaps I can help?" Theoden ventured. "No need," Li Wei replied. Just taking a casual look. A casual look? Seeing if any treacherous ministers might harm Rohan. He spoke loud enough at the hall's entrance that the words rang out. Many hearts lurched. If he chose to, he could cut down anyone there, guards and nearby troops included. "Did you get some secret information?" Theoden asked, more composed than most in the hall because of his long familiarity and trust in Li Wei. Still, he was puzzled. "Not exactly, just a vague premonition." Li Wei scanned the room. "For now, there aren't any particularly dangerous ones." He meant the treacherous sort. Rohan's Golden Hall didn't appear to be infiltrated. "Sometimes you can trust those close to you more than you trust advice from outsiders," he added. "I understand." Theoden nodded. Li Wei smiled and then, quiet for a moment, said, "You have your father's manner." Theoden was taken aback. "That is a great compliment." Chapter 322, Possibility of Restoring the Kingdom, a feasibility report on the complete eradication of Angmar. In 2992, inside Roadside Fort, Li Wei felt a lift in his spirits as he read a new proposal from the Ranger Legion. After decades of effort, with Li Wei's help, the Ettenmoors that bordered Angmar had been largely cleared years earlier. The mountain trolls and orcs that had made that wasteland dangerous were gone. The few that remained had fled further into the mountains. The stretch of forest between Roadside Fort and Rivendell, once called Troll Forest because of frequent ogre sightings, had long since outgrown its name. No ogres remained. The Rangers had swept that dark wood hundreds of times over recent decades without finding a single one. It was now classed a relatively safe zone, and merchants and travelers often took the detour to see the 3 petrified ogre statues. The path from the road to their stone home had been worn flat by so many feet that it had become a little trail of its own. Behind Troll Forest lay the Ettenmoors, and beyond the Ettenmoors stood Angmar. In the old days, danger grew as one moved through those 3 regions. Nobody dared pry too closely, for fear some man-eating horror would burst out at any moment. But Troll Forest and the Ettenmoors had been thoroughly dealt with, the former safe, the latter almost clear. As for Angmar itself, reading the report gave Li Wei a headache. If he treated the 3 regions like dungeons, Troll Forest would be slightly challenging. With the right method, its enemies could be removed safely. The Ettenmoors were difficult, home to many mountain trolls, orcs, and packs of wargs, which required careful planning and ample forces to fight through. Li Wei's Great Wall project had eased that difficulty a notch, giving the Rangers a nearly impregnable fallback. Then came Angmar. Clearing the Ettenmoors hadn't been fast, and for many years the Rangers had been at a loss over Angmar's terrible concentration of enemies. As one Legion champion put it in his account, enemies were everywhere, large and small, ogres, orcs, packs of wargs. Advancing 100 meters felt like wading through a bog. Just when you cleared the front, you'd look up and see eyes everywhere. On the mountains, in the woods, in pits, ahead and behind you, your scalp would crawl. The difficulty of conquering Angmar was described as purgatory. The feasibility report concluded that if they wanted to minimize losses and carry out the operation most securely, they needed at least 10 more years of preparation before launching a final cleansing. That was the low-loss scenario. A more aggressive approach could shorten the timeline, but at much higher cost. Li Wei consistently refused strategies that risked heavy casualties. "There's no need to rush," he told the Legion. "No one's pushing us. Cherish life. I won't gamble for quick glory." Roadside Fort's strategy was conservative, extremely conservative by many measures. Yet to outsiders, it often seemed daring. Almost no other power, save the free city-states, would seriously contemplate eradicating a den filled with mountain trolls, vast numbers of orcs and wargs. The manpower and losses required would be staggering. A war like that could leave an army broken and a nation reduced to a tribe. The Rangers had accepted that burden. One night, Li Wei found Fallodin resting on the city wall, stargazing. "You've met Aragorn, haven't you?" he asked. "I have. I even saw the Star of Elendil," Fallodin said with a broad smile. "Thank you again, truly." Li Wei patted his shoulder. "Don't say things that make my scalp tingle." They fell silent under the stars. After a while, Li Wei asked, "Have you ever thought about restoring your kingdom?" "Restoring the kingdom?" Fallodin echoed. "Yes, rebuilding Arnor, restoring your realm." Fallodin turned to him. You know you're called the Lord of the Northern Territory, right? Of course. You should know, Arnor was once called the Northern Kingdom. That doesn't conflict with what I'm saying. Falodin paused. People remembered the old days, so did Li Wei. The Lonely Lands were now administered by the free city-states, and much of the surrounding region enjoyed peace under their influence. Yet, Li Wei had not pushed outward to claim more of the lands once clearly marked as Arnor's. Minhiriath, by the sea north of the Shire, the Barrow Downs, the North and South Downs, Bree, places that still held ruins of cities, fortresses, and watchtowers the Old Kingdom had built. Li Wei had left those landmarks alone. I remember, Li Wei said softly. That was once your home, wasn't it? It was not only Li Wei who remembered. The Shire's library recorded how Arnor had stood for the free peoples, fighting the Witch King's invasion from Angmar until it crumbled. Both sides had been nearly destroyed. Only remnants of Angmar's forces survived, hidden or scattered. The Shire's annals even noted the Hobbit's part in that great war, a company of archers sent in support, fulfilling a simple duty. The Shire had been settled with the king's leave. In return, the Hobbits had been required to maintain roads and bridges and allow royal messengers free passage. Beyond that, the Hobbits' courage in war had surprised the Dunedain. Those small folk showed a boldness that always astonished those who underestimated them. If the day comes, Falodin said after a moment, I will give my support. Consider it repayment to the rangers of this land, Li Wei replied, and to your current chieftain for serving me so loyally. Chapter 303, The Prophecy. Lately, the number of wanderers in Roadside Fort and the City of Water had grown noticeably. Between the two places, more than 100 wanderers were staying there. They weren't on holiday. Most served as instructors or were hired as lecturers, and these posts didn't look temporary. By their demeanor, it was clear they intended to stay until several batches of students had been trained. On the front lines, there were even more wanderers, some young, some old, advising the green recruits at Roadside Fort or joining veteran blade units on charges and raids. Something definite had reached them, and each responded in his own way. The most talked about among them was a figure the men and hobbits of Bree called Strider. The name was neutral in meaning, neither praise nor insult. He was said to appear and disappear around Bree like a shadow. The nickname came from his long legs and wide strides. He could cover a great distance in a single step. He stood nearly 2 meters tall, so every person in town had to look up to talk to him. He takes 1 step and I have to run 3 to catch up, a hobbit complained once. Saruman had ordered his men to keep a close watch on him, but when Aragorn did not want to be seen, the trackers rarely caught even the hem of his cloak. More often than not, the rangers would turn tables on the watchers and trace their own watchers' origins instead. He's been doing this for more than a day or two, one spy reported. Li Wei was not surprised when Aragorn relayed the news. Both men were too indifferent to dwell on Saruman's antics. The old wizard had always been paranoid. In another light, Saruman could be seen as extremely cautious. He assumed others were as distrustful as he was, trusted no one, and prepared layers upon layers of contingency. That same thoroughness had let him prepare for a great war, amassing forces that could overwhelm a not insignificant realm. It was a pity such talents had not been used for better ends, just like his senior brother, Sauron. I just came back from Isen River Crossing, Aragorn said. Nothing odd. Heavy guards as usual. Hard to sneak in. How do you usually get in? Aragorn asked Li Wei, curious. Li Wei shrugged. I just walk straight through. Every time I go, someone opens the door for me. That's it. That's it. Aragorn nodded. On the surface, at least, Saruman still treated his kin with a sort of guarded civility. Li Wei didn't mention the time Saruman had refused to open his doors, prompting him to kick them down and give the old wizard a reprimand. Experience taught quickly, and Saruman learned his lesson fast. They fell silent for a moment. Aragorn rose, walked to the window, and stared up into the dimming sky where the great star of hope had begun to gleam. Thoughts crowded his mind. The restoration of the kingdom. He and Li Wei had discussed rebuilding Arnor. When Li Wei broached the subject, Aragorn had known it was no idle notion. There were no external forces to block them. The pace of recovery depended on his own will and the efforts of his people. An elderly Dunedain had once spoken a prophecy that had since settled in Aragorn's heart. When the king of Gondor returns, Arnor shall also be restored. With nothing pressing behind him, he could only look forward. Aragorn and his folk continued to pour their energies into the free city-states and the scattered territories around them year after year. Meanwhile, things also unfolded in the Shire. In the year 2994, Drogo Baggins died at the age of 86. His grave was piled with flowers, and people spoke of him as upright and decent. In his life, he had left little to be criticized, aside from a single reckless, near-drowning years before. After Drogo's death, his wife Primula sank into a long, gray sorrow and eventually chose to return to her family in the South Farthing. The family home passed to Frodo. Frodo was 26 then. He still possessed a hobbit's gentle innocence, but he was no longer a child. Loss had taught him many things. Living alone, he spent his days wandering the Shire's lesser-known paths, roaming wild fields, climbing hills, and lingering by streams. Those wanderings eased his grief, but fed a quieter loneliness. Visits to his mother helped, but could not erase the ache. He began to think more and more of his uncle, Bilbo. "I'm sorry, Frodo, but people must come to an end," Bilbo told him in Bag End. "What we can do is live well with the blessings of those who love us." "I know, Uncle. I will," Frodo answered. Bilbo patted his grandnephew on the shoulder and smiled. He took pleasure in Frodo's frequent visits, but his own thoughts turned inward. Age was catching up to him. There were certain things he no longer had time to delay. He wanted to write, to put down his stories, the legends he had been part of, and those that remained, to set his life on paper. Tucked in his book were a few mementos, including a palm-sized dragon scale that stopped him every time he opened the pages. If he could, Bilbo also wished to take one more journey in his life. Though not the reckless sort of adventure of his youth, his old limbs might not take it. "So it's decided," he murmured to himself. A travel plan formed in his mind, but a thorn remained: Bag End itself. The Sackville Bagginses had not forgotten the matter of Bilbo's home. After Otho and his wife were frightened by Lee Way, they had been on their best behavior for a time, but their covetousness returned as the seasons passed. Bilbo lived alone and had no heir. Once he was gone, legally Bag End could fall into their hands. The thought rankled. They had not sought him with kindness and had caused him endless small vexations. Once, they even spread a rumor that he had died on an ill-fated trip to the Lonely Mountain. Bilbo had endured their petty tyranny for 50 years and had had enough. How to settle Bag End? He asked himself aloud. The question gnawed at him. He wanted to leave the Shire and see the world again, but he could not bear the thought of leaving Bag End to the Sackville Bagginses by default. He resolved, with quiet stubbornness, that he would not let that family inherit what he loved. He would find a way to ensure Bag End passed to hands he trusted. Chapter 324, The Year the War Begins. Time usually passes quietly. Looking back, one realizes there are not so many world-shaping events that touch everyone, at least not often. Quiet, more often than not, is the norm. Many people live and die in such peace. Their night comes and they pass on. Standing before two recent, side-by-side gravestones, Lee Way closed his eyes and exhaled. "My night is still far off," he murmured, then placed a flower on each grave. When they had first met, both young men had been in their 20s, free rangers who had crawled through front lines, crossed wildlands and mountains, and traveled with caravans and with him past the Black Gate. They had fought for the title of Legion Champion in an unforgettable duel and come to represent an era. Now that era was ending, and they had died, one after another. That day, Lee Way went into the warehouse, selected basic materials, and built a modest but dignified memorial hall on the open ground near the cemetery. He arranged solemn furnishings inside. On a stone platform, he set the dragon steel sword Arwen had returned to him. Behind it, he erected a memorial wall and wrote a single line on the first line of the first wall. First Legion Tournament Champion, Arwen, 2908 to 2996. A sword had been given a history. It would remain on display until its next user arrived. Each champion's weapon would have its own platform and memorial wall. When the hall opened, the other champions took time to come back, place their weapons, and carve their names on the corresponding walls. From then on, every new Legion champion would come here to claim an inherited weapon and to commemorate the predecessors who had borne it. Several months passed. Li Wei inspected the northern Great Wall and then went deep into Angmar. It's about time, he thought. In 2997, Roadside Fort held its largest meeting in years. Present were commanders of the fort's various legions, garrison and ranger, company captains, legion champions, ranger representatives and instructors, and internal coordination and management staff, community representatives, project managers, and caretakers and managers of key facilities like armaments and supplies. The theme was the final purge of Angmar. After decades of campaigning, this operation had finally reached its final phase. It was time to finish it. Li Wei personally oversaw the preparations. He was no longer the uninformed offline leader he had once been. After Bard's death, he had quietly learned the things Bard had told him to study, even those he had previously pretended not to hear. The meeting ran long. Li Wei's steady, conservative strategy shaped the plan. Logistics were solid, supplies and weapons were abundant, and the management cadres were competent veterans who knew both civil and military needs, able to coordinate effectively. The offensive plan was cautious but decisive. Excluding necessary garrison troops, Roadside Fort and Water City would jointly dispatch 10,000 elite troops north. Li Wei would serve as supreme commander, assisted by 2 Roadside Fort commanders. Beneath them would be 5 Legion commanders and over 100 company captains. The basic structure was 2,000 men per legion, 10 companies of 200 men each. Each legion would include at least 1 Legion champion positioned near the Legion commander to protect him and prevent unexpected losses. Each company would have at least 2 excellent rangers, and among those 2, at least 1 would be skilled in management and tactics to handle coordination and execution. These posts were flexible. Personnel could be interchanged when needed. 10,000 elites, with Li Wei present, should be enough to deal with Angmar's remaining forces. The enemy in that region were precisely what the term residual forces implies. After a decade of constant pressure, their numbers and density had been greatly reduced. The campaign had been prepared for a long time, and the objective was achievable. After the meeting, Li Wei entered the Hellgate, found the Nether Bastion, and farmed Blaze for months, gathering a huge stock of potion ingredients. Healing potions were replenished on a scale sufficient to support a large war. By mid-2997, the meeting closed. By late 2997, all preparations were complete. In the spring of 2998, after the annual festivities, with winter snow gone and buds appearing on the trees, the army began to assemble. Because of the long preparation, rangers active in distant regions and those living in tribal areas received the summons and hurried back. Under Aragorn's leadership, the rangers mustered their own legion of over 1,000 to lend support, nearly all the combat-ready personnel they could spare, including many female rangers. It was almost a tribal mobilization. After a 1,000-year blood feud with Angmar, the tribe could not stand aside now. With them, the force swelled from 10,000 to 11,000. To make use of that talent, Li Wei appointed Aragorn as the 3rd commander. Wait, just as everything was settling, Li Wei narrowed his eyes and looked toward the rangers. Why are you hiding? Hobbiton, who had been trying to hang back, was called out. He should not be underestimated. After travels in the east, he had even faced ringwraiths alone. His strength was at the level of a Legion champion. At over 150 years old, with more than a century of combat experience, Hobbiton was a hardened veteran. His career included more than a century on battlefields, serving as an instructor at the Roadside Fort military camp, lecturing at schools, leading city defenses, and cutting down ringwraiths. Among the rangers, his prestige was second only to Aragorn. It would be a true waste not to give such an elder a post. So Hobbiton took the vacant Legion commander position for the Ranger Legion, a widely expected choice. He expressed no objection. This time, it's good to go, Li Wei said. Depart. Everything then moved forward in orderly fashion. Angmar's reckoning was at hand. The hidden dangers there might finally be eliminated. After the army marched out, the cities felt quieter, but that quiet was deceptive. Some might think Roadside Fort and Water City were left under-defended, But Li Wei's conservatism showed here too. There were actually more garrison troops inside the cities than had gone north. Whether on offense or defense, he would not leave a gap. Even if another army of over 15,000, like the force that had once come from Moria decades earlier, arrived while Li Wei was absent and an expeditionary army was already in the field, the two cities could handle it without calling for outside reinforcements. Chapter 325, White Light Pierces the Dark Clouds. The grand army that had gathered at Roadside Fort marched north in a mighty procession, passing the Great Wall's defenses under the watchful eyes of the rangers. They pressed into the dark mountains and stepped onto the sickly brown soil of Angmar. Li Wei drove his dragon flame steel greatsword into the earth. Dry grass flared and turned to a ring of ash. Thunder rolled overhead and the sky took on a jaundiced green hue, as if some corrupt power still lingered in the clouds. Eyes glinted crimson or green in the gloom, sights that would make any ordinary man falter, even one in armor with a sharp blade. But none of the 11,000 troops in the expedition, 6 legions strong, showed fear. They followed the man at the front in perfect order. From the dark ridges and forests came roars, ogres, wargs, maybe both. Then, a boulder the size of a man hurtled through the air, whistling straight for Li Wei. The 3 legion champions nearest him drew their dragon steel swords and stepped forward to intercept, but their actions were almost unnecessary. Li Wei leapt up and brought his greatsword down. With a ringing clang, the stone shattered in midair, only small shards falling behind him. "Mountain trolls," he said, landing lightly and turning to the direction of the attack. The attacking ogre fell momentarily silent, cowed by the display. Li Wei would not give it time to recover. He raised his blade, pointed toward the darkened sky, and the purge began. The silver-white host plunged into Angmar like a blade through shadow. The dragon flame steel greatsword cut through charging ogres, ripping through their stone-hard hides and setting flesh alight. 2 or 3 strikes felled one outright, bones sometimes sheared. The legion champions followed close, their own dragon steel swords slicing cleanly and swiftly, opening a path for the army. Now and then, a soldier would be flung by some giant's blow, tumbling and rolling, appearing grievously hurt. After a few coughing gasps, he would haul himself up, steady his bearings, and either stagger back for treatment or push forward to fight. Faint glows sprang from their armor as protective enchantments awakened. Every piece of armor and every weapon among these tens of thousands carried enchantments, accumulated steadily by Li Wei over the years, and that accumulated power was beginning to show itself on the battlefield. Rain came down hard, turning the road to mud. Steam rose around Li Wei as the air grew hot. His outline shimmered and blurred like a terrible apparition to those who faced him. This operation would not be a quick sweep. Angmar had once been a sorcerous kingdom of vast reach. East to west, it spanned hundreds of miles, and rooting out every remnant would take time. Lingering magics might slow them at points, but only marginally. The legions advanced with iron-steady steps, unstoppable and resolute, their pressure sapping the resolve of the dark things. Still, nobody relaxed. Even creatures that spent their days preying on the weak could, when pushed to utter despair, unleash a last, terrifying counterattack. So the men held their ranks and watched. Elsewhere, the campaign's suddenness shocked many. The Roadside Fort army had gathered and departed with almost no fanfare. Aside from the nearby rangers, few had been informed. Allies received no warning, no proclamations, no trumpets, only a goal, silent preparations, and when ready, execution. Swift, decisive, enviable. As if it were just a routine task, not even worth a grand announcement, said one observer. In Gondor, atop a white tower, Denethor watched an image and sighed with a measured calm. "It seems some fellows don't want my uncle's expedition to go too smoothly," he mused. He glanced toward Minas Morgul when the sudden heavy rain showed in the vision. No one truly believed the Witch King was uninvolved. During his reign, the land of Angmar had been suffused with a strange, ominous power, and that same influence left Angmar and the Ettenmoors seldom feeling the touch of the sun. Boromir. Denethor's voice called through the chamber. "I am here, father." The reply came from outside the door, youthful, vigorous, full of confidence. A handsome, tall young man with shoulder-length black hair entered. Boromir, 20, and already steeled by frontline experience. Like his father, he wore armor beneath his robes and kept weapons at hand even within the seeming safety of Minas Tirith. Denethor smiled briefly and clasped his eldest son's shoulder. Boromir, still only a youth in the steward's eyes, had earned his place in the field and could be counted a true fighter. The smile faded quickly back into seriousness. "Take some men and keep watch on Minas Morgul," Denethor ordered. "Monitor the Witch King's movements and report everything to me. If he dares to make any move," Boromir began, "then I will cut him down." Boromir finished the sentence for them both with fierce certainty. Denethor allowed himself a small, knowing smile. The boy's pride was admirable, if a little premature. He had not yet seen the poisonous mists of Minas Morgul or the terrifying scenes that lay within that valley. How like himself he was once, so the steward thought. Denethor unbuckled the iron sword he had worn at his side for decades and, with solemn gravity, handed it to Boromir. "Take this. It is the iron sword Leeway gave me. It looks plain, but it is tough and unbreakable. I pass it on to you now." Boromir bowed and received the weapon with both hands. Its edge was as keen as when it had first been given. The young captain left for the front lines, bound for the shadow of Minas Morgul, the sorcerous tower where the Witch King's presence brooded, the valley choked with poisonous gas. That terrible sight would stay with him for years to come, etched into his memory and unforgettable for the rest of his life. Boromir rode out with a company for Osgiliath, where this new garrison would be posted long-term among the ruins, watching Minas Morgul and the Witch King from the forward line. After he left, Denethor came down from the high tower that housed the Seeing Stone to visit his other son, Faramir. He was 5 years younger than Boromir, 15 years old this year. Denethor's favoritism for his elder son was obvious to anyone who knew them, yet Faramir met his father's approach with a calm, shy smile. "Father," Faramir said, rising from the book in his hands, "you've come." "I came to see how you've been," Denethor answered, voice even. "And how are you?" "Very well, father." Denethor studied the refined, thoughtful boy. The brothers resembled one another, but their natures diverged sharply. Where Boromir had always craved battle and glory, Faramir preferred books and music. He had a softer temperament, less hunger for risk. People whispered that the steward's second son was not as bold as the first. Denethor only nodded. "Your brother goes to the front to show what he can do," he said. "I wish him a safe and triumphant return," Faramir answered simply. Denethor bowed his head with a faint approval. The younger son was steady and untroubled by talk of comparisons. The brothers had never quarreled, and their bond was good. "Keep to your studies and your music. I have high hopes for you both." He patted Faramir's shoulder, turned, and left. Between the two sons, the one strong and the other gentle, he believed the family might yet endure. At the top of the tower, he convened another council. None had felt the pressure of Sauron more directly than Denethor. The years of watching the Palantir had increased the weight in the stone, the shadows within it deepening. The great enemy's resurgence grew faster each season. Under Denethor's orders, the tower's guards had grown stricter, not to guard the Seeing Stone from theft, but to keep people from looking into it. He would not risk another's mind being driven to ruin by a single glimpse into that darkness, not even his son's. When the latest meeting of Gondor's leaders drew to a close, Denethor exhaled and closed his eyes to the familiar ache in his chest. He could bear it yet. "Then continue," he muttered to himself as if speaking to the thing in the stone. "Let me see who will be broken first." "Gondor will not be destroyed while I yet live," came the defiant thought that rose in his mind, and Denethor's jaw clenched. Far away, other councils and quiet conversations were being held. Inside the lonely mountain, Thorin's beard threaded with gray, he frowned over troubling reports. "So he forbade us to reclaim Moria, and then turned against Angmar?" he said at last. Balin's voice wavered with remembered loss. Fili, younger and more practical, demurred. "Uncle Balin, Leeway had his reasons for keeping us from Moria." Thorin sighed. "Perhaps, I only wonder. Ought we to go to his aid?" Silence fell among the dwarves. "This isn't like before," Fili said. "This was Leeway's choice to make, not a burden forced upon him. If we rush in, we might undo what he has laid out." Thorin considered, and then proposed a measured course. "Ask the acting lord at River Valley City. He should know more. They had doubts. Liwei's ways had always been peculiar and cautious, yet time had tempered the old friend. His plans had grown firmer. In River Valley City, Bane, white-haired now, answered for Liwei. I have spoken with him. He says we must hold our own borders. Very well, Thorin replied, relieved. Elrond, too, had watched the stirring from afar. As one most allied with the Rangers and in sympathy with Aragorn's gathering, he had been tempted to offer assistance. But counsel reached him saying it was unnecessary. Elrond, wise and not impulsive, withheld his forces. Since this was a task of men, let men make it theirs. He gave them his quiet blessing and stood aside. In the Shire, gentler grief occupied another heart. In Buckland, Frodo sat by a small grave he had raised for his mother, Primula Brandybuck, 2920 to 2098. Tears fell as he read the epitaph and remembered the empty house she had left him. The loss was sharp, but it did not swallow his life. He carried his mother's blessing forward, lifting his face to the sun. At Bag End, Bilbo watched the younger hobbit with something like pride. He remembered how his own parents had died when he was young, leaving him alone in that same hole until an old wizard uprooted him for adventure. He had often thought he should have given that wizard a stronger scolding. Frodo, Bilbo said one afternoon, catching his nephew's eye, there is something I have been meaning to tell you. Frodo waited. Bilbo hesitated, then changed his phrasing mid-speech with a small, embarrassed chuckle. Bag End has been good to me, he said. Too comfortable, perhaps, that I am tired of being disturbed by that wretched Sackville Baggins family. And yet, Frodo, quick to read him, asked gently, is something troubling you, uncle? Bilbo complained of the Sackvilles' greed, how they had spread rumors of his death years ago to seize his home, how they harried him until Liwei, no, until a friend had warned them off. Frodo's sympathy was plain and earnest. I have enjoyed my quiet, Bilbo admitted, but perhaps I have enjoyed it too long. If you eat the same food every day, you weary of it. I have grown tired of solitude. After a long talk that night, Frodo made a decision. He would leave his small house and move into Bag End to care for his aging uncle. Not long after, Bilbo did what he had longed to do. He named Frodo his heir. The news fell upon the Sackville Bagginses like a thunderbolt. Their last hopes of inheriting Bag End without resistance were dashed. Chapter 327, Purge Angmar. The sky has cleared. On the long wall in the northern territory, Gandalf glanced toward Angmar in the distance and muttered to himself. No, not quite. Only a strip of the sky had cleared, the space where the expeditionary army had pushed the darkness back. As the evil creatures were swept away, the residual sorcery there slowly dissolved. The retreat of shadow moved from the center outward. At this rate, it would take only a year or two to cleanse this vast, tainted land. Not slow at all. It seems I'm not needed here. With that, Gandalf descended the wall and set off westward toward the Shire, a cart of fireworks in tow. It was New Year. He meant to show a fine display at the Shire's celebration and to carry news of the northern campaign. Word of that great purge would spread across Middle-earth in time. Later people would call it the Northern Territory Expedition. By early 2999, the expedition had entered its final phase. Most of Angmar had been swept clean. Wherever the army passed, the black ichor of evil creatures stained the earth and a sour, metallic tang hung in the air. In the cold, snowy heights at Angmar's western end, Liwei called aloud, and his legions fell into formation with the same order and gravity they always showed. The enemy, fragmented and disorderly, had cost them little. Such victories were near bloodless for the allied host. Carn Dûm. From the peak, Liwei looked down at the ruined bastion where the last of the monsters had gathered. Once the capital of Angmar, the bastion had been taken 1,000 years past and left empty when the Witch King fled. Now the ruins swarmed with foul things, and a faint, sickly green glow pulsed from its walls. There is still some magic clinging to that bastion. He was weighing whether to attempt a direct assault when the sound of hooves approached. Soldiers made way for a fast horse. Gandalf rode up, dismounted, and called, "Liwei!" Liwei lifted a hand in greeting. Aragorn rode at Gandalf's shoulder. The wizard caught his breath and said at once, "I heard you intend to take that bastion." "Exactly. The rest of Angmar is cleared, except for that place. All the remaining enemies have shut themselves up inside. If we take it and root them out, the expedition will be complete. Li Wei glanced between the brown, clouded sky over Carn-Dûm and the clear, bright lands behind their army. After today, Angmar will no longer be a shelter for evil. Gandalf smiled. A great work. History will remember it. You here only as a witness? Li Wei asked. No. Gandalf leaned on his staff at the front of the host. I will deal with the Bastion's magic. Good. We'll leave it to you, our trustworthy wizard, Li Wei said after a moment's thought. There were other ways to reduce a ruin, but why refuse a ready and apt aid? Gandalf, among the wizards of Middle-earth, was exemplary in doing exactly that which needed doing. Light ran along Gandalf's staff. The bastion's sickly green glow wavered and then faded, revealing the pitch-black, ice-crusted stone beneath. The final encirclement began. A thunderous blast shattered the front gate, where the protective light had vanished. A few well-placed charges tore a great hole. More explosions followed, and one flank of the bastion crumbled almost entirely. The creatures trapped within had nowhere to flee and were forced out to face the host. At the head of the assault, the Lord of the Northern Territory, the wizard, and the three commanders advanced with swords raised, setting the example. The army pressed in, its momentum so fierce the dark clouds above seemed to be swept aside. By day's end, the bastion, bereft of its defenses, had fallen. The last of the foes were slain or captured. Those who had sheltered inside had cut off their own escape. None slipped away. With the bastion taken, Angmar's last black clouds dissolved and sunlight returned. The blighted soil, in time, might once again grow green. Grass could one day carpet the plateau. The last chance of Angmar's restoration to evil was extinguished. Even orcs and wargs, hiding in secret caves in the deep mountains and ancient forests, were hunted down. The western flank of the Misty Mountains was now secure. Only one place still harbored a great number of enemies, Gundabad, in the northernmost heights of the Misty Mountains. The Great Range had once been the place where the first of the dwarves awoke, but it had long become a stronghold of orc kind. With Angmar broken, the orcs of Gundabad felt the net tighten. East, west, north, and south lay enemies. Their options were few. The dwarves were not indifferent. Gundabad was sacred ground to them, where Durin First, the Deathless, first rose. Overnight, the dwarves mustered to join the assault. Faced with Li Wei and his host, the orcs fought on with dwindling hope. Their last struggles were fierce but increasingly futile. By late autumn of 2999, Gundabad was declared clear. No orc was left. The dwarves had recovered their holy place. Gundabad became part of the free lands. There was some dwarf and human presence, but the region remained stark and remote. By year's end, a watchtower was raised on Gundabad's heights to keep watch on the northern approaches. The mountains, harsh and barren, drew little settlement. Save for the outpost guards, human traffic was rare. Dwarves came most often. They climbed the slopes as pilgrims, straining up to stand where their ancestors had been born, to remember and to mourn and to give thanks. Thus another page of history turned, and the north began to mend. Clang! Clang! From deep within the Black Tower's forge, the ring of metal on metal never ceased, and a cold, brilliant light pulsed against the walls. A white-robed figure bent over his anvil, hammering with steady, exact strokes. With a final, careful tap, the tools were set down. Saruman picked up the newly forged ring. His hands trembled. Ah, it's perfect! The ring shone with a pure, star-like light, flawless, immaculate. Saruman could only smile. A success, he murmured. Behind him, on an obsidian pedestal beneath a glass casing, lay the empty shell of a beacon, the lightless housing where some artifact had once been kept. Saruman slipped the ring onto his finger. At once his robe billowed, though there was no breeze. A vast power flowed through him, the ring serving as a channel. He felt it, measured it. Slightly mightier than the 3 elven rings, but still far beneath the one ring. A shadow crossed his face. Having himself forged a ring of power sharpened his understanding of the One Ring and honed an obsession that had grown for years. He breathed out and smoothed his features, restoring the stern composure he always presented. 1,000 years ago, when Gandalf received the Ring of Fire from Círdan, Saruman had been consumed by envy, convinced he alone deserved such a thing. Now, a millennium later, he had done it himself. He had forged a ring surpassing the elven rings. He no longer envied Gandalf. He felt above him. Li Wei, oh Li Wei, I must thank you. he whispered, thinking of the beacon that had given him the material he could not otherwise have obtained. Without it, Saruman feared, the strongest ring he could have made might only have equaled the elven rings. Now he began testing the new ring. Beyond the usual enhancements a ring of power could grant, this one contained something unprecedented. The beacon's star metal had lent it an extra ability, a buff to its wearer. It could grant overwhelming strength, renew one from near death, grant nimbleness, or harden the skin like armor. Star Ring, he decided after a moment. From now on, I am the master of the Star Ring, Saruman the Ring Forger. A thought of appearance crossed him. His white robe seemed too plain for such an accomplishment. He waved his hand, and dyes, pigments, and tinctures were brought to Isengard in great quantity. Months later, he emerged in a robe that dazzled and confounded. At first glance, it was white, yet when he moved, the robe shimmered with 1,000 hues woven so closely together that the overall effect read as white. In bright light, the colors danced. In shadow, they sank into a sinister darkness. Saruman admired the effect and gave himself another name, Saruman of Many Colors. In sunlight, the robe flashed like a spectrum, and in darkness, it had a menacing, almost black aspect. "Whom do you obey?" he asked one of his captives. In the underground breeding rooms, Saruman grasped the head of an orc with the hand that bore the star ring. His eyes shone with a terrible white light. The orc's thoughts shifted under that pressure. I obey the great Saruman." When Saruman released his grip, a white, withered handprint was stamped on the creature's brow. He examined it with satisfaction. The ring could secure absolute loyalty. Orcs who might have broken before upon sight of Sauron would now remain faithful once they bore that mark. They could be wielded against Mordor itself. Saruman imagined the praise he would receive from Gandalf and from Li Wei if they could see what he had wrought. But the captive before him was weak. Years of experiments and breeding had produced only marginally stronger orcs. They were unfit for his designs. Fortunately, the star ring increased his power, and he planned further work. Not yet, he decided. Until the orcs are stronger, I will not reveal everything. Saruman still told himself his work was for the defeat of the great enemy. Then, in the year 3000, a spy in Gondor brought word that changed him. The man had little to report, but he let fall a detail others had missed. Denethor sometimes entered a tall tower, and in it used a seeing stone. Saruman's reaction was instant and furious. Denethor, daring to use a palantir. Saruman could hardly contain himself. Fool, why have you not told me this sooner? Yet when he considered it, Saruman's pride turned to one of those terrible envies that feed ambition. If Denethor could use the stone to such effect, why could not he? He strode to the room where a palantir lay. No sooner had his hand brushed the great seeing stone than two immense wills struck him like blows, one hard and iron-like, the other shadowy, deep, and spreading. He staggered as a colossal eye burned into his vision, drying his lips. The dark presence spoke with slow certainty. We are one and the same. After that, for all his outward bravado, Saruman was different. A week later, Gandalf came to visit Orthanc and saw it with his own eyes. Standing in the tower, he frowned at his old friend. Saruman, you do not look well. Is something troubling you? Do not trouble yourself. I am well, Saruman lied, forcing a smile. Gandalf only wanted to speak of the north. You know, I suppose, that the evil folk of Angmar and Gundabad have been driven back by the armies of the Free City-States. This will change the shape of Middle-earth. Saruman could not help but praise Li Wei's allies. I admit it, Li Wei's men are strong. Those city-states are a mature polity, almost like Numenor in some ways. Domestication, you use the word lightly. Li Wei would object. Gandalf defended his friend. Their system has matured, yet it lacks longevity. Li Wei has lost many old comrades. That has weighed on him. Saruman waved the remark away. Short-lived peoples always bemoan their losses. Why concern yourself? Gandalf tried to correct him, but Saruman's mind kept straying. He seemed distant, preoccupied, a man whose thoughts had slipped beyond the reach of speech. Seeing this, Gandalf sighed, rose, and prepared to go. They walked to the tower entrance together. Gandalf stepped into the sunlight and inclined his head. Saruman stood with half of him in light, half in the tower's dark. As Gandalf receded down the road, Saruman made a sudden, almost involuntary movement, raising his hand as if to call him back. Wait, the syllable died. Pride and shame held his tongue. He could not summon himself to beg counsel from a gray wizard he believed beneath him. Gandalf walked away, and the last flicker of light in Saruman's heart began to fade. He watched until Gandalf was gone, then turned back into the shadow of Orthanc. Help? The thought escaped him like a plea, but it was barely there, faint as a whisper. A voice, bright and annoyingly amused, answered from above. Saruman looked up and saw a figure seated on the stairs leading to the tower's higher rooms. The newcomer had appeared without sound and looked down at him with a half-smile, as if enjoying a private amusement. "Don't you know how to knock?" the visitor said. Chapter 329, Blocked, Rejected. For once Saruman snapped at the uninvited intruder before his brain caught up. Li Wei spread his hands and said, "The door was open, so I walked in." "You don't look well," Li Wei added as he approached. Saruman's guard went up at once, his heart tightened. He frowned and studied Li Wei for a long moment. "It looks like you've just finished a long, drawn-out fight. How did you know?" "I heard the noise. Even if no one told me, I can smell blood on you. The scent clings. It's unpleasant. You should bathe." "All right. I haven't bathed in a long time." Li Wei lifted his forearm and sniffed. There was only a faint trace of blood and nothing else unusual. That could be fixed with a bucket of water, but there were more pressing matters. "Tell me, Saruman, what happened? Don't try to hide anything from me. If you refuse, I'll pry the answers out myself, and I doubt you'd like that." Silence hung in the tower. Saruman hesitated, then lowered his head and sighed. After a long pause, the two of them went up to the tower's highest floor, to the Stone of Seeing. The heavy, opaque cloth that had covered the crystal was gone. At once, Li Wei understood. The old man had been unable to resist activating the Palantir. He probably hadn't completely succumbed to Sauron, but he hadn't conquered him either. He was still struggling. If Li Wei hadn't followed Gandalf and appeared when he did, Saruman might very well have been lost. "Have some milk," Li Wei said. "You know what it does." Saruman took the cup with visible reluctance and drank it in one gulp. "How do you feel?" Li Wei asked. "Nothing," Saruman replied quietly. He set the cup down. Li Wei frowned. Some things of the mind were not so easily altered by external measures. They weren't temporary buffs that a single drink could clear. "You warn everyone else about this," Li Wei said, "and yet you couldn't resist doing it yourself. Truly." He shook his head and stepped closer to the crystal. "What are you doing?" Saruman reached out. "Do you intend to follow in my footsteps?" "I am not you, Saruman." Li Wei touched the Orthanc crystal with one hand. His will pushed into the clash already swirling inside it. With a boom, two fierce wills lunged instinctively at the new intruder. The first was an immensely powerful will, strong, abrupt, but apparently realizing its mistake only as it struck. It could not pull back. It crashed in like an iron weight thrown into a vast lake and sank. Li Wei's expression shifted briefly to something like a smile. He treated that first pounce with mild amusement. Then his attention was drawn to another, deeper will, the bottomless presence of Sauron. The lights in the tower died at once. Evil whispers crawled into Li Wei's ears, and a rolling darkness, fathomless and hungry, came crashing against his mind. It slammed and surged, trying to wash away his will, but the waves beat against a mountain. Li Wei did not break. He had watched history move and had said farewell to one confidant after another. He had outlived friends and witnessed their blessings turn into strength for him. Grief and helplessness had left marks on him, made him tougher and more resolute. Perhaps that legacy, what his old friends had left, was his final help. No matter how Sauron pressed, he could not have imagined that a man might change so much in less than 100 years. The darkness reluctantly receded and dissipated. Li Wei exhaled, a little tired. Then the Palantir's visions opened up for him. Information and images flowed into his mind. Now he could use the Stone of Seeing freely. Neither Sauron nor anyone else could bar him from probing various places. He knew, however, that the Palantir remained dangerous. Anyone who used it could be spied upon by other users. The closer the observers, the more they revealed. Denethor had daily used his Palantir to gaze into Mordor. In reality, Sauron could likewise peer into Gondor. The two sides confronted each other almost every day through those stones. "This crystal will be entrusted to me," Li Wei said. "It's too dangerous to remain where it is." Saruman said nothing. His silence was assent. Be careful, he managed. As Li Wei turned to leave, Saruman could not help one last, reluctant warning. Don't forget, I'm not like you, Li Wei replied lightly, and he walked out of the tower. The lights came on again behind him. Saruman closed his eyes and sank back into his chair, feeling strangely relieved and faintly unwilling at the same time. His robes no longer shimmered with color. They looked subtly darker and grayer. At Roadside Fort, on the very top of the nameless tower, Li Wei set the Orthanc crystal on a stone platform and sealed it within a ring of guardian glass that only he could break. Now, short of the world ending, no one could reach the crystal. For a long time, the Palantir stayed unused. Then, on a sunny afternoon, Li Wei remembered it. He lifted the cloth and peered in. He saw Gondor, he saw Mordor, and he saw into the black heart of that land. Come, come. Faint whispers slithered through his mind. The voice tried to draw him deeper into Mordor. Unusually, for Li Wei's probing the eye made no defense. It opened a view of Barad-dûr and seemed to welcome him, the blackness itself offering clearer vision. You and I needn't be enemies, the voice crooned. I can help you, give you what you've always wanted but couldn't gain. I can make you stronger, omnipotent. Not interested. Li Wei withdrew his gaze. His tone was flat, his face unchanged, but if anyone had been close enough and keen-eyed, they might have noticed the faint shift in his breathing. Lies rarely tempt those with strong desires. Sometimes only the truth can move a man. What Sauron promised may well have been true. Li Wei felt the instinctive certainty of that, but the price remained unknown. That's enough. Li Wei shut down the Stone of Seeing, covered it with a thick cloth, and left the secure compartment he had made for it at the top of the tower. He locked the door tightly. Chapter 330, Prologue. Frodo, I am not as good as you imagine. One night at Bag End, while Frodo slept, Bilbo sat at his desk by lamplight and began to write. I don't know what moved me to make this decision, he wrote, and it certainly wasn't kindness. Perhaps I feel that among all my relations, those who bear the name Baggins, only you have the true spirit of the Baggins family. I have therefore decided to entrust Bag End and all my possessions to you. As for me, do not worry. I only wish to take one last journey before the end of my days. I have been thinking on it for a long time, and I fear if I delay any further, it will be too late. The faint scratch of his pen came steadily from the study. Bilbo wrote well into the night. As a hobbit, he had reached the pinnacle of worldly success. Wealthy, respected, the oldest hobbit in the Shire, and head of the Baggins family. In every sense, he was esteemed. Yet the spirit of adventure proved stronger than a life of comfort, just as it had 60 years before. When he finished that letter, his will, Bilbo sealed it carefully and began another note, an invitation to a party addressed, simply, to Li Wei. An unprecedentedly grand 111th birthday party, the invitation proclaimed. In September of the year 3001, at Roadside Fort, Li Wei opened the newly delivered letter and read it carefully. He turned the news over with Gandalf, who stood beside him, pipe between his fingers and smoke drifting from his mouth. I know. I've made a fair few preparations for this, Gandalf said. Li Wei followed his gaze. When Gandalf had arrived, he had hitched a whole little cart of fireworks to a small pony. Are you referring to that cart over there? Li Wei asked. Uh-huh. Don't underestimate my special fireworks, Li Wei. They may not be the most powerful, but they're far prettier than your battle fireworks. Believe me, I have been practicing this craft for 1,000 years. I look forward to it. Gandalf nodded as if to say, just wait and enjoy the show. I must be off now. That little pony doesn't travel fast. If I'm delayed, he'll start complaining. Little pony? Li Wei tilted his head. Why not take a fast horse? Gandalf grew thoughtful for a moment, then said faintly, a fast horse? Too fast. Why? The last time I rode one, the cart flipped and I was pitched out. You don't want to know how that felt. My back still aches. That would be unpleasant, Li Wei said with a shrug. He had learned that when carrying too much cargo, speed could become a liability. When will you leave? A few days at most. I'll arrive before the party begins. Gandalf left. Li Wei leaned back in his chair, fingers tapping on the table as his thoughts drifted northward. With Angmar cleared, its land slowly recovered, grass spread, and a gentler climate returned with time. Outposts sprouted in the former capital and beyond, to watch the wastes past the great snows. It was unnecessary in strict logic, but the unpeopled white fields still put Li Wei and the rangers on edge. For that reason, Angmar and the Ettenmoors had not been opened for settlement. Only a few sentinel posts declared a watchful presence. Conservative caution ruled until any hidden dangers were proven gone. Most folk lived behind the Great Wall, keeping a wary guard against the north waste beyond Angmar. After seeing to his duties, a few days later, Li Wei mounted his horse and followed Gandalf westward to the party that had been planned for so long. The cartwheels rumbled along the country lane, sometimes clanking in potholes. A tune drifted down the road, melodic, relaxed, and easy. The road goes ever on and on, out from the door where it began. Now far ahead the road has gone, and I must follow if I can. A warm voice sang, and near the top of a little hill, a young hobbit crossed his arms and scolded. "You're late, Gandalf." "A wizard is never late, Frodo Baggins," Gandalf replied, stopping the cart and looking up. "Nor is he early. He arrives precisely when he means to." They regarded one another for a moment, and then both burst out laughing. "It's so good to see you, Gandalf," Frodo cried, hurrying forward. "You didn't think I'd miss Bilbo's birthday, did you? If I did, he'd give me a proper scolding." "I heard from Li Wei that this party is unprecedentedly grand," Frodo went on. "Indeed," Gandalf said. "The whole Shire is in a fluster, chickens flying and dogs jumping. Half the Shire has been invited, the other half will come of their own accord." So everyone in the Shire will be there. That truly will be an unprecedented spectacle." Gandalf puffed on his pipe and smiled. "I've brought the right fireworks for it. These things are only fun with a crowd." Frodo's face sobered slightly. "Uncle Bilbo has been staring at maps and zoning out a lot lately. I suppose this has something to do with you, Gandalf?" he added with a look. "What?" Gandalf feigned innocence. "Just pretend. Before you arrived, the Baggins family had a fine reputation. Nobody expected them to go on adventures." "That's not entirely true," Gandalf said, shaking his head. "You can't lay this at my door alone. Bilbo was always a bit mischievous when he was young. Once he ran from Bag End to the Old Forest and didn't return until night, made his parents frantic." "Oh, I never heard that," Frodo said, surprised. His uncle seemed to him a mysterious elder, full of stories. Even after years of knowing him, there was always something new to discover. "Well, it's just as well you didn't," Gandalf chuckled. "He wouldn't tell you of his embarrassing moments." "At most, I gave him a nudge back then," Gandalf added. "Most of his choices were his own." "Is that so?" Frodo looked doubtful. "Whether or not it's your doing, the Shire has already given you the title of troublemaker." "Really?" Gandalf's eyes took on an even more innocent expression. He glanced at a neighbor tending his garden, who smiled and was promptly slapped on the head by his wife as she came out of the house. "Oh well, their prejudices run deep here." "Gandalf!" A gaggle of children burst from a nearby garden, clamoring for fireworks. "Fireworks! Children, at least, are beyond prejudice," Gandalf said with a wink. Whoosh, boom. At his prompting, a small rocket shot up and burst into a scatter of sparkling butterflies that fluttered before fading. The children squealed with delight. Listening to their laughter, Gandalf and Frodo exchanged amused looks and laughed too. And so the prologue of the story began. Chapter 331, Ring Appears. The carriage stopped in front of a hobbit hole tucked beneath spreading oaks. Gandalf tapped the butt of his staff against the round green door. Thump, thump, thump. From inside came a sharp, familiar voice. "No visitors, no formalities, no long-lost relatives, thank you." Gandalf smiled wryly. This fellow had been put out lately. "What if it's an old friend?" he called. The door swung open at once. "Gandalf, my dear Bilbo." Gandalf dropped to one knee, took Bilbo by the shoulders, and looked him over with a mixture of affection and puzzlement. 111 years old, and you look hardly a day older." Bilbo returned the embrace. "It's so good to see you," he said, glancing past Gandalf. "Don't bother looking. Li Wei is probably still on his way." Gandalf let his eyes narrow briefly. There were many things in the world that could keep a person seeming young. One of them, he thought, was certain and dangerous. He kept quiet, letting Bilbo lead him inside. Come in, Bilbo insisted. "Forgive me, I thought you'd be here last week. I haven't got a proper feast ready, only some cold chicken and pickles. Or perhaps I should open a bottle of my very fine wine first?" It's older than I am. He bustled about, fussy and pleased to have company. Gandalf sat at the table. An old map lay spread out there, the same map from the Lonely Mountain expedition, weathered and ink-stained, with notes and updates added by hand. Much of it had markings for the free city-states. Gandalf studied the scrawl of names and routes, then looked up. "Are you ready?" he asked suddenly. Bilbo paused with a teapot in his hand. "Ready? Oh yes, ready. I long for the world outside, Gandalf. I dream of walking the fields and woods again. But I am old." Bilbo poured tea, and then, in a voice small with worry, added, "I don't look old, not to others, yet I feel strange, as if I'm being stretched thin, grown weak. If I had to put it oddly, it's like butter spread too thin over too much bread." Gandalf's expression grew grave. Before he could say more, there was another knock at the door. "Who now?" Bilbo muttered. Gandalf gestured. "I think that's the person you wanted to see." The door opened to reveal Li Wei. Bilbo brightened at once. "Welcome, welcome. If you hadn't come, I'd have doubted my letter was even delivered. Sit, sit. Perfect timing. The kettle's just boiled. I'll make tea." "Thank you," Li Wei said, seating himself beside Gandalf at the little table. The three friends settled into a quiet afternoon, drinking tea while Bilbo fussed back and forth over the preparations. By evening, Bilbo went off to see to the feast. Taking advantage of the lull, Gandalf pulled Li Wei aside and spoke in a low voice. "Stretched," he said. "That's the right word. A power ring doesn't extend life so much as it stretches it. Rings tied to mortal wearers didn't lengthen their years in the proper sense. They forced life outwards. The bearers seemed to live longer, yes, but their souls grow thin from being stretched. Their strength weakens as the years pass because there is less of them to hold the power." Li Wei listened, troubled. "That doesn't sound good." "No," Gandalf agreed. "Not at all. We must speak to Bilbo." When Bilbo called them to the feast, they put the conversation away and joined the merrymaking. It was a night unlike any in the Shire. Bilbo had outdone himself. The green was filled with dancing and laughter. Gandalf, who carried bundles of fireworks, set them into the ground and lit them. Sometimes he even shaped little sparkling creatures to flit among the children. Frodo encouraged Sam to dance with the one he fancied. Old Bilbo told his stories with theatrical flair, and the children listened with wide eyes. A tent at the edge of the celebration caught and spat a wayward firework shaped like a dragon. Its trajectory clipped across the gathering and nearly burst above the center of the party. Two lads came away with soot-blackened faces, laughing despite their singed hair, and Gandalf, half irritated and half amused, pinched their ears and made them wash the dishes. All else was in good spirits. At the height of the night, Bilbo climbed a little platform to make a speech, greeting friends and kin. Midway through, to a chorus of astonished gasps, he vanished from the stage. The crowd murmured, delighted and mystified by the trick. Bilbo had slipped away then to Bag End, where he was finishing his packing in private. Inside, a sudden voice made him give a start. "You scared me, Li Wei," he said. "If that was on purpose, it was a good one." Li Wei, leaning against the doorway, watched Bilbo fold a coat into his travel bag and leave a neat little note by the hearth. He looked at the ring on Bilbo's finger with a hard, contemplative expression. Gandalf arrived moments later, and the two older friends shared a look and a quiet nod. "Not funny?" Bilbo protested when Gandalf peered at him with concern. "How can you say that? Didn't you see their faces? It was wonderful." Gandalf's face was all kindness and warning. "Bilbo, there are many magical rings in the world, but none of them should be used lightly or kept unguarded." He had been the one earlier, out among the children, to set off most of the fireworks, but now his tone was sober. He turned to Li Wei. "You knew about this ring?" Li Wei shrugged, the motion small. "Yes, for a very long time. I even tried to destroy it once, many times, but I failed." Bilbo's expression collapsed from mischief to pleading. "Destroy it? No, you mustn't. I like this ring. It's beautiful, isn't it? It's mine, and I mean to leave it to Frodo." Li Wei sighed deeply and handed Bilbo a glass of milk, as one might hand a troublesome child something to calm them. Gandalf and Li Wei exchanged another look. It was time. They had to deal with the ring, and the time for gentle warnings had passed. Chapter 332, Taking Care. Bilbo held the cup of milk and drank it all. Still the same," he said. "Tastes like always," which was to say, it had no taste at all. Are you really planning to leave this with your other things? Gandalf asked, once Bilbo finished. Of course, it's no use to me. It's beautiful, and it has power, but if it stays with me, it'll only gather dust and never be used again. That would be a shame. A shame? Bilbo hesitated, as if surprised by his own words. He reached into his pocket and drew the ring. For a moment, the light in the room seemed to dim. Gandalf's eyelids fluttered, his breath caught, and it took him several seconds to steady himself. Leeway glanced at Bilbo's hand as well. A tiny ripple stirred in him, like a drop falling into a silent lake, but he was not shaken. He had stood against Sauron himself. To be moved by a mere glance at a trinket would be cowardly. At least, the corruption that could not be wiped away by ordinary means would not increase without direct contact. No, why don't you keep it? Leeway said. I found it, my precious. Bilbo clung to the ring, words trailing off. The ring's infiltration was deep. A cup of milk each morning could not fix it now. If the ring had had no effect, Bilbo would never have survived so long with it. Like Gollum, part of his soul had been stretched thin by constant contact. Compared to Gollum, the change was small, mostly just arrested aging, but after 60 years even Bilbo's resistance had begun to crack. Perhaps Sauron's growing power had something to do with it too. Leeway, who had felt Sauron's resurgence most keenly, knew the Dark Lord had grown bolder, as if events were once more falling into place. Bilbo Baggins, Gandalf called suddenly, thunder in his voice. An awe-inspiring presence rolled out from him, a glimpse of the power beneath the Grey Wizard. It was only a little of his true self, but enough to awe any mortal. Bilbo froze. The obsession left his eyes like a fog lifting. Wake up, old friend, Gandalf said softly as the aura ebbed away. Bilbo clung to him, trembling. I only wanted to help you, Bilbo, Gandalf murmured, patting his back. Trust me, like before. Leave it. Bilbo swallowed hard, under the steady gaze of the two men. He drew a long, steadying breath and nodded. You're right. He closed his eyes, loosened his fingers, and let the ring fall. It struck the floor with a small, oddly heavy sound. Bilbo sighed as if a great weight had been lifted. He looked lighter somehow. I'm leaving, he said. He smiled. I'll go see the places I've dreamed of. Roadside Fort again, the newly risen city of water, the lonely mountain beyond the peaks, and Rivendell. He laughed softly. To finish my book, my ending is decided. And he lived happily ever after, until the end of his life. He hugged them both one more time. Goodbye, Gandalf. Goodbye, Leeway. Goodbye, Bilbo, Leeway answered, kneeling to meet his eyes. We will meet again. Bilbo set off, humming the old road song. The road goes ever on and on, out from the door where it began. After the door closed behind him, Gandalf moved slowly toward the ring. Just as his finger was about to touch it, a fiery, demonic shadow flashed through his mind. I sense him, dark, deep malice. There's no mistake. He looked at Leeway, who had stood quietly, unreadable. You know what this is, don't you, Leeway? Of course, I've known for a long time, Leeway said without hesitation. It's the One Ring, the Master Ring. How can you be sure? Gandalf's suspicion showed. Saruman told us the One Ring was swept away in the Great River, lost to the sea. The One Ring hasn't been seen in thousands of years, Leeway agreed. From the second year of the Third Age until now, nearly 3,000 years, there was no sign of it. Don't trust Saruman blindly. He has his own motives. Leeway stepped aside and revealed the ring. The three of them stood looking at it in silence. If the ring had been capable of sweat, it would have been drenched. How does it feel? Gandalf asked. Oppressive, dark, Leeway answered. Step back a little, or you'll block the light. Gandalf gave a rueful smile and moved away. He was still reluctant to accept it. So much depended on this small band of gold. The course of the world could turn around it. If it truly is the One Ring. Leeway shook his head. Don't look at me. Don't ask me to touch it. Gandalf rolled his eyes. They sat back down at the table, Gandalf to his pipe, Leeway to a cup of tea, leaving the ring where it lay. We must be sure, Gandalf said. This involves too much. If it is the One Ring, the stakes are the final contest between light and shadow. No one can stand aside. Gandalf fixed Leeway with a steady look. You are the leader of the greatest human power right now. You must understand what this could mean. He spoke of the borderlands nearest Mordor, the free city-states, Rohan and Gondor, each guarding the approaches in their own way. The free city-states relied on hard power to block northern advance. Gondor, with its chancellor's iron will, stood at Mordor's gates and fought enemies from all sides. Rohan sent cavalry across the plains, watching for leaks and fighting on both fronts. Their combined strength had kept Sauron at bay so far, but if he gathered his forces again, if the One Ring were wielded, the balance could shift catastrophically. Could we hold in a war like the Second Age? Gandalf asked quietly. Hard to say, Li Wei admitted. I'm confident, but there are hidden dangers. You said Saruman activated the Seeing Stone on Orthanc last year, Gandalf said. He was nearly swayed. Right after you left, Li Wei corrected. I came just behind you that day and stopped worse from happening. I took the Orthanc Stone and now keep it high in the unnamed tower at Roadside Fort, and I use it occasionally. That worries me, Gandalf muttered. He had always distrusted Saruman's recklessness. What did you see? Endless armies, Li Wei said. He described the scenes he had glimpsed in the stone. Tens of thousands of orcs marshaled by Barad-dûr, huge ogres, spiders, monstrous beasts, some winged, menacing like poor imitations of dragons. That was only Mordor's inner reserves. From what I could see, piecing together other reports and minor visions, the total force might be no less than 100,000, possibly twice that. And that's only the known threat. Gandalf fell silent. The peace of recent years had dulled some of his vigilance. The free city-state's prosperity had made him complacent. In truth, the balance was never solidly on the free people's side. Without them, Sauron could have pressed an assault already. The ring changed everything. That's why I suspected something here for some time, Gandalf said, and why I have not touched it all these years. At one time, I tried to destroy it myself, Li Wei admitted. I failed. That's not surprising, Gandalf replied, drawing smoke from his pipe. No ring of power can be easily destroyed. We must proceed with caution. They had hardly finished speaking when footsteps sounded in the doorway. I didn't expect Uncle Bilbo to really leave, Frodo said, entering and picking up the ring from the floor. He turned it over with casual curiosity, as if it were a charity coin. Gandalf's brow twitched. Li Wei exchanged a look with him. That was your uncle's ring, Gandalf said. He left it to you. Don't worry. He's gone to live with the elves, he added, pulling an envelope from beside him. Bag End and all Bilbo's possessions, including this, are entrusted to you. Put it in there, Frodo. Gandalf opened the envelope and beckoned. Without hesitation, Frodo slipped the ring inside as if it were nothing special. A seal closed with a soft click. It's official, Gandalf said. Bag End and the ring are yours. Keep it safe. Don't let anyone find out. He handed Frodo the sealed envelope and exhaled, a brief relief passing over him. He looked once more at Li Wei. We've bought ourselves some time, Li Wei said. Go about your work, Gandalf, Li Wei added. I'll watch things here. I promise everything will be fine. Chapter 333, Two Brothers. After leaving the Shire, Gandalf rode with Li Wei to Roadside Fort, where they found Aragorn resting. He had been idle of late, so Gandalf seized the chance. I need your help with something, Gandalf said, and Aragorn followed him without protest. The three left Roadside Fort and pushed east, searching for traces of a certain creature. From the rangers patrolling the wilds, they learned a name, Gollum. I've seen him, someone said. Gandalf fell silent, thinking. I never thought this small, wretched thing I have always overlooked would be the key, he murmured. I have underestimated him. I should not have let him go free back then. Months later, Gandalf returned to Roadside Fort. Are you saying the ring Bilbo had came from Gollum? He asked. Exactly. Li Wei answered, correcting Gandalf's misunderstanding. Bilbo never spoke of it. I used to think he found it somewhere in a cave. In a sense, he did, Gandalf admitted. Let us not speak in riddles, Li Wei said. Gandalf sighed. So Gollum knows the ring, or at least suspects it, is in the Shire. If that gets out, it will draw a great deal of attention. Even then, the Shire need not fear, Li Wei replied, reading the daily reports and sipping his tea with quiet confidence. I promise that this region has been watched by the Rangers for decades. If necessary, we can call up several legions to reinforce it. There will be no accidents. Even if all 9 Nazgul rode out with tens of thousands of troops, I will not let them cross Roadside Fort a single step, he added. All evil ends here. Gandalf nodded, relief washing over him. I can see how well defended this place is. There are forces to the east, south, and north. To penetrate these lines, the enemy would have to fly. If they can fly, I'll shoot them down myself, Leeway interrupted, waving his hand. Gandalf laughed. Then I am wholly reassured. Having learned all he could at Roadside Fort, Gandalf wasted no time. He rode back into the great wilderness and sought out the ranger captain stationed there. Tell me, where did Gollum go? South, the captain replied. He crossed the wilds, passed through the brown lands, and waded the dead marshes. After that, we lost his trail. That region is beyond our watch. You might speak to the rangers of Gondor. Gandalf's face tightened. Beyond the dead marshes lay Mordor. He rode on without pause, cutting south into Ithilien. There he met Boromir, stationed near Osgiliath. Boromir, son of Denethor, Gandalf greeted him warmly. May I ask you something? Boromir, standoffish by his father's decree against speaking with wizards, answered coolly. I regret, Master Wizard, I have not seen this Gollum you name. That must have been long ago. My men and I have only recently arrived at these front lines. You might ask in Minas Tirith. Older rangers and veterans there may know. After delivering this curt courtesy, Boromir left it at that and returned to his duties. Gandalf could see the distance in him, the restraint and the inherited distrust. Still, compared to the chief steward, at least Boromir showed the basic respect due to an elder. Gandalf shook his head and rode on to Minas Tirith. He was scarcely inside the White City when a young man came forward. Are you the Grey Wanderer, Gandalf? The youth asked eagerly. Faramir, the young man introduced himself. Greetings, Master Wizard. Is there any way I can help? Gandalf smiled. Faramir bore a strong likeness to Boromir, but there was a softness and steadiness in him that set him apart. The old wizard found himself pleased. Faramir's questions came readily, and Gandalf answered them all, sharing everything he could. The younger man listened intently, absorbing knowledge like a thirsty land drinks rain. Faramir did more than ask questions. He spoke with veterans and retired rangers in Minas Tirith, following leads and collecting what little information remained about Gollum's passing through Gondor. His manner was careful and courteous, yet not lacking in courage or resolve. Gandalf's fondness for the man grew. He found himself regarding Faramir as one would a promising pupil, thoughtful, brave, and kind. I never supposed Denethor could father a son so sound in character, Gandalf thought. He must not be corrupted by his father's will. But news travels. Denethor, proud of his elder son and already wary of outside influence, was outraged when he learned his younger son was spending time with a wizard. Speak less with that old man, Denethor warned. I do not want you to associate with him. Yes, father, Faramir answered earnestly. Yet Denethor's command was ultimately ineffectual. Faramir continued to receive Gandalf with courtesy and to seek his counsel. Denethor felt powerless, as if he had been struck and could not catch his breath. He was displeased, but what could he do? Gandalf, perhaps sensing that his presence caused trouble, did not linger long. Before long, he took his leave. Chapter 334, Battle of Eastmark. At least there's one piece of good news. Gollum shouldn't have fallen into Mordor's hands yet. Gandalf was not a man who lost sight of priorities. It was precisely because he could confirm that intelligence that he had stayed in Gondor an extra while without fretting. After leaving Gondor, he met up with Aragorn again, and the two had spent weeks tracing Gollum's steps. His tracks fanned east of the Misty Mountains, from the Anduin Valley to the Old Forest, from the administration lands of Rovanion to the Brown Lands, then down to the Dead Marshes. But there were no solid leads. It seems your search hasn't been very smooth, Li Wei remarked, when he later found them at a temporary camp in eastern Rohan, near the Brown Lands. It hasn't, Gandalf admitted. Gollum's movements are strange. He seems to have gone into Mordor at times, but sometimes traces suspected to be his appear well outside it. Very suspicious, Aragorn added. What's stranger is that the signs of his hunting are frequent. There are animals, orcs, even Uruk. If he's as thin and weak as they say, how could he bring down creatures stronger than himself? He must have help or some unusual method, Li Wei mused. Did you examine any skeletons closely? No, there weren't any, Aragorn said. I only inferred hunting from faint signs and from how the orcs were moving. I even slipped near Mordor to overhear them. So many orcs had gone missing that an Uruk chieftain with a lame leg accused a traitor among them and ordered a lockdown. "Let's not dwell on that now," Gandalf said, turning his attention to Li Wei. "Why are you here?" Aragorn also looked surprised. "Why come to Rohan's eastern border? Has something happened?" Li Wei lifted an eyebrow. "Can't I be out for a walk?" Gandalf fixed him with a long look that said, "Don't try to fool me." Li Wei smiled, dropped the teasing, and explained plainly. "I read the border guard's reports. A considerable number of orcs have gathered above Raros Falls and are moving toward Rohan, and a few days ago, scouts from the Bay Riverbend reported an Auke army in the Emyn Hills. The people of Rohan don't know this yet." "That is important," Gandalf said. Before anyone could say more, Aragorn stood up. "They're back." A thunder of hooves announced a small cavalry force riding into the makeshift camp. As they slowed, the leading captain dismounted, took off his helmet, and walked forward with a salute. "Hail to you, honored Lord of the Northern Territory, Grey Wizard," and he hesitated at Aragorn's name. Aragorn's face was too plain. Unless you had known him long ago, you would not recognize him. Li Wei stepped in. "This is Aragorn, son of Arathorn. He once fought with your king and is his friend." The captain accepted that at once. Reputation carried weight. After the formal greetings, he asked Li Wei directly, "Have you come on important business?" Li Wei relayed the reports. When the captain heard Emyn his expression hardened. "An Auke army there?" "Yes, scouts from the southern river said so. It's reliable." Something worried the captain. "Just now, a band of orcs trying to break into Eastmark was routed. Our marshal pursued them and rode off toward those hills." "Who is your marshal, and how many men went with him?" "Lord Eormund took only a few dozen riders." Gandalf let loose a displeased grimace. "Too reckless. It seems we have work to do." Li Wei, being the most respected among them, swung into action. He mounted quickly, waved his hand, and shouted, "Move out! Follow me to support your marshal." The soldiers glanced to their captain, who had already mounted and set off after Li Wei. "Let's go," he ordered, and they rode east in a tight line. Gandalf and Aragorn accompanied them. Neither would simply wait. In the Emyn Hills, a few orc scouts watched with amusement as a small cavalry force chased broken specks of soldiers toward them. "I know that man. That's their marshal," one said. "Tell the chieftain, killing a marshal would be a fine deed," another replied. The routed men fell under hooves and blades, screaming, but the hidden orc scouts merely watched. Then the main Aoka host arrived, and the orc chieftain raised his scimitar. "Kill!" Marshal of Rohan and Lord of Oderberg realized at last that they had been led into a trap. Where they had thought themselves in pursuit, they were now surrounded. He had only a few dozen cavalry against thousands of orcs. 100,000 variations of tactic were useless against such numbers. Break out? Impossible. There would be no return. "I'm sorry," he said, voice steady though his hands trembled. "This was my mistake." He drew a long breath and added, "It has been my honor to ride with you. We must make our last stand here." He lifted his sword high and shouted, "Let our enemies see what it is to face death without fear. Show them what true courage is." "Charge with me," he cried. "Charge to the enemy. Charge to destruction. Charge!" Dozens of riders roared as one, and their voices rang like a trumpet over 1,000 men. "Kill them!" The orc chieftain sneered and urged his massed ranks forward. The hideous faces of the enemy closed in, forming defenses to blunt the charge under the chieftain's command. Doom seemed certain. Eormund's thoughts touched his children, his son Eomer and his daughter Eowyn, both still young. He trusted Theoden to watch over them. A thunder of hooves startled him back to the present. A tremor came from behind. A shadowed figure leapt ahead of him and his dozen riders, slamming into the enemy line. With a single, brutal stroke of a dark red, almost black greatsword, he forced a gap in the orc formation. "Form up! Charge!" he barked. At Li Wei's command, more riders poured onto the field. The captain's detachment merged with Eormund's, swelling the force until it was many times larger. They drove straight through the Auka ranks and split them asunder. "I came just in time," Li Wei said, shouldering his greatsword in the heart of the melee. The surrounding orcs staggered back as if struck by a shockwave. Eormund, breathless, managed, "You reckless!" A warm but severe voice cut through the clash. Gandalf, arriving a moment later with Glamdring in hand, glanced back at Eormund with a reproving look before plunging into battle alongside them. He rode a swift horse equal to any in Rohan and fought with the same fierce courage. The balance of the fight swung in those moments. Where hopelessness had almost taken root, the sudden arrival of reinforcements and the gray wizard's steel reignited resolve. The small cavalry that had once faced annihilation found fresh breath and drove into the orc lines, determined that they would not perish there without making the enemy pay dearly. Chapter 335, Anomaly. By the time the reinforcements arrived and their leader entered the field, the battle was already decided. The orcs fell into immediate disarray and could not mount any coherent counterattack. Their leader was beheaded in an instant. His body collapsed and was incinerated where it fell. The deputy leader and the squad commanders, those with the influence to shout orders, were already frozen with terror when they saw the foe, a name feared even among their own. None dared give a command. They all knew that even a single shouted order would be a death sentence. Even if they had not feared death, the army was beyond saving. In minutes, it had splintered into fragments, the situation reversing so swiftly that no one could react. At dusk, the orc corpses were gathered and burned. Thanks to the timely aid of Li Wei and the others, Eomund lived. After the grim work was done, Audiobook erupted in a grand celebration banquet. "I truly don't know how to thank you," Eomund said, raising his glass. "My thanks to Lord Li Wei of the North, to the Grey Wizard Gandalf, and to Aragorn. Those orcs were craftier than I expected. If you had not brought the warning, I would have died in those hills today. Even knowing Theoden would care for my children and house if I fell, I would have regretted missing their lives. Fortunately, that did not happen. Since I survived, I will live well." Li Wei patted his shoulder in encouragement, then leaned over and admonished the marshal. "Be more cautious going forward. Don't be so reckless. Your rashness can hurt not only you, but those under your command." "I will remember," Eomund replied with a slight nod. The evening passed warmly. For the first time in a long while, Gandalf and Aragorn found a moment to relax. Their nerves had been taut for 2 years. Seasoned warriors and wizards were used to tension, and Li Wei was no different. A brief ease of strain was enough. Even without leisure, one could find comfort amid busyness. Li Wei in particular took pleasure in cooking. After the Eastfold campaign ended, the three spent one night in Audiobook, attended the banquet, and then departed. With nothing pressing, Li Wei returned to Dale to visit Bane, Brand, and Brand's son, Bard II. "Time really flies," Li Wei murmured as he watched the family. Bane was old now, as was the memory of the original Bard. Seeing Bard II, named after his famous ancestor and already at play, Li Wei smiled and ruffled the boy's hair. "It's nothing. Go on, child," he said. He had adapted to local naming customs. Names like Turgon, Ecthelion II, Denethor II echoed famous figures of old. Whether homage or vanity, no one chose a name without adding a numeral to show they were not the first. Looking at Bard II, Li Wei wondered, with half amusement, whether somewhere some parent had named a child Li Wei VI. He could not bear to think his fame should be assumed. He was not dead yet. "I hope this child inherits his great-grandfather's courage and will, and not only his name," he said quietly. Bane, sitting at the table, looked up at Bard II and murmured, "I will do everything in my power to leave behind only what is good." He was well into his 70s now. Brand had returned from his trials and spent a year at home. Children's laughter filled the house. In those years, Bilbo journeyed across mountains and rivers, stopping at Roadside Fort and then Rivendell, where he accepted Elrond's offer to settle for his retirement. Surrounded by elves, Bilbo's mind stirred. He consulted them and began compiling a collection of elvish translations. Finding the elves had always been Bilbo's dream, one fulfilled in the quest for Erebor, and in time it was wholly realized. He lived among the elves, seeing them every day. In the year 3004, at Roadside Fort, Gandalf walked up to a castle gate and rapped. He waited a long time without answer. He had grown used to Li Wei's frequent absences. More often than not, the house was empty when he visited. "Little Pink," he called under the Malorn tree, but there was no sign of life. Just as he turned away, a notice fell from the tree. In a neat line of fairly large letters it read, "Beherden's home, Beherden." Gandalf stroked his beard and thought, "If I recall, that name means guardian in some old tongue. He smiled at the tree's new address. All right then, our Beherdin, where has Leeway gone? This time the tree answered, north. Angmar's outpost. Angmar. Gandalf frowned. He mounted and rode north at once. A few days later, he reached the ruins of the old capital and the Carn Dûm outpost now held by the Free City States. The sentinels there told him Leeway had crossed the mountains several days before and ridden deep into the northern wastes. They did not know why. Gandalf waited, curiosity keeping him at the outpost for nearly a week. At dawn one morning, the mountains stirred. A huge corpse rolled down a snowy slope, bouncing and scraping to the valley below, yet remarkably intact. The surface showed no crushing deformation. It bore sword slashes and burn marks, evidence of a fierce fight. Gandalf hurried forward, frowning at the malign aura the thing radiated. Then a figure skied down the mountain behind the corpse, landing with light, steady grace. Gandalf, what are you doing here? The newcomer called as he approached. Passing through, Gandalf answered. Where have you been? And what is this? The newcomer tapped the white-furred corpse with a staff. You might not recognize it at first, but this is an ogre, probably a variant. For now, I'm calling it a snow ogre. He flipped the creature over, and Gandalf saw its fanged mouth and ferocious face. Actually, the newcomer said, fixing Gandalf with a look, I wanted to ask you, do you recognize this thing? Chapter 336, Pride. At the foot of the mountain, Gandalf stared at the corpse of the snow ogre and fell silent for a long moment. No, I don't know it. I've never seen one before, at least not in the last few millennia. I've read a few passing mentions of creatures like this in old books, he continued. They're said to live in the uninhabited snowfields of the far north and almost never cross the mountains. Folks in Middle-earth seldom encounter them. That is odd. Leeway looked from the dead snow ogre to Gandalf. Earlier, the sentinels and the frontline rangers told me they'd seen strange things up on the snowy ridges. One of them looked like this ogre. The other was something like a warg. One ranger described them as being entirely snow-white or pitch black, slender like ghosts with ferocious faces, Leeway said. They looked like wargs, but more terrifying and far more agile. Gandalf's brows drew together. Did he see it with his own eyes? He did, Leeway answered. I didn't encounter anything more ferocious than a warg on this patrol, but I trust my men. So you know something about them? Gandalf asked. I do. I'm very familiar with them, Leeway said. Fellwolf. The word, seldom heard in this age, slipped from Gandalf's lips. The cold wind rasped past, and a few crystal snowflakes scattered on his cloak. Days later, in Roadside Fort, Gandalf stood by a window, pipe in hand, and spoke more fully. Like wargs, the Fellwolves descend from the evil wolves, creatures recorded as far back as the years of the trees, even before the First Age. They became allies, or rather servants, of Morgoth. Sauron himself could take the form of an evil wolf while in Morgoth's service. Morgoth bred two variants from those evil wolves, the warg, with broad shoulders and a back fit for riding, and the Fellwolf. Compared to wargs, Fellwolves are far more dangerous. Morgoth injected evil spirits into their kind, making them smarter and more vicious. Leeway asked, curiosity making his voice sharp, Is that why you look so grave? Could they be so dangerous that all the free peoples of Middle-earth would fall at once? No, Gandalf said. Not even close. They are more agile and intelligent than wargs, but even 10,000 of them gathering wouldn't, I think, cross that great wall in the north. Leeway tried to make sense of it. I thought Fellwolves had been extinct for thousands of years. They should be gone, Gandalf agreed, which makes this, the North Wasteland, all the more troubling. Leeway made a half-joking shrug. The North is a strange place, full of old things. Gandalf's face grew grave. From the ogre you killed, I can sense an old, familiar kind of evil. It doesn't feel like a snow ogre that has always lived out in the fields. It's like this one lived in some ice cavern and was driven out. You don't feel it? Leeway asked, puzzled. I do, Gandalf said simply, and that means it may be worse than it seems. All right? Leeway's brow tightened. I'll have the frontier outposts watch more closely and strengthen the border defenses. That's best, Gandalf said. After a pause, he added, If my suspicions are right, the pressure in the north could grow unusually great. If anything happens, tell me. If I can help, I will. I will stand with you, Leeway promised. Good. Gandalf sighed and soon left Roadside Fort for the Shire. He had been visiting there often in recent years, partly because Bilbo had asked him to look after Frodo when he could, and partly because Gandalf wanted to watch for anything unusual. He found Frodo well. The young hobbit had the easy manner of the Baggins line, very much like Bilbo. After receiving the ring, Frodo had paid it little mind. He hadn't even opened the envelope that contained it. The letter lay pushed into the corner of a cabinet, years untouched. As the cabinet filled with clutter, the ring had been pushed all the way to the bottom and all but forgotten. Frodo preferred going out with Merry and Pippin or wandering alone to enjoy the quiet. Seeing him safe and peaceful, Gandalf felt relief. For a hobbit, a simple, quiet life was the best life. Year 3005, Dale. Lee Wei sat inside a warm house, looking at Bane across from him. A complicated tenderness passed through his eyes. Bran told me you haven't been well lately. Are you ill? Don't worry, Uncle. I'm fine, Bane said, patting his chest. Mostly it's just insomnia. I sleep less than I used to, and sometimes when I stand up after sitting a long while, I get a bit dizzy. That's common. Even strong young people have that sometimes. Lee Wei offered the only practical advice he could think of. Try to rest more. Bane hesitated, then admitted, maybe something's on my mind. Like what? Lee Wei asked. Not anything I can name, Bane said with a small smile. Maybe I'm just getting older and remember things more. I think about my father and how it was when I was a boy. We were poor then, and sometimes we worked hard just to have a full meal. It wasn't that life was unbearable, he went on. Nor was my father lazy. It's just that the town mayor at the time always made trouble for our family and shut off most of the ways we could earn money. He feared your family, Lee Wei said, putting it bluntly. Bane laughed softly. At first, I thought my father was afraid of them, Bane said. Later I realized they were afraid of him. That's the strange thing about the world, he mused. Those who seem powerful are full of fear toward those they think weaker. As they reminisced, both men smiled without meaning to. It was an odd human kind of comfort. The world was often helpless and ridiculous, and sometimes that made it bearable. Before he left, Lee Wei told Bane firmly, for now, set aside heavy tasks. Take care of yourself. You've done well here, Lee Wei added. The prosperity is clear to everyone. Your father would be proud of you. And so am I. Chapter 337, The Sigh of Life. Under Lee Wei's persuasion, Bane did not hesitate for long. He soon stepped down as chief governor of Rovanion and the River Valley region and settled into a quiet retirement. His successor was Brand, a man already well respected for his achievements. At his inauguration, Brand drew the dragon flame bone blood sword that had passed from Bane to his family and placed it before him, then swore his oath of office. By the name of the Lord of the Northern Territory, Lee Wei, supreme leader of the Free City-States and head of the Northern Men, I swear to govern this territory faithfully until my strength fails or until the supreme leader or the people deem me unfit. Lee Wei accepted the oath. From that moment on, every regional chief governor was required to take it upon assuming office. A new house was formally recognized, represented by Bard and called the Governor's House, or the Bard family. This family carried the blood of the old River Valley city. That bloodline had a peculiar trait. Its members could understand the songs of thrushes directly. Even dwarves who had tamed thrushes could not do this. They had to rely on ravens that could speak human languages to translate anything they wished to learn. It wasn't a grand or decisive power, only a small, odd gift, but it was something. Bane greeted Brand's actions with a slight nod and otherwise remained calm. Brand had grown into a man capable of carrying the family and managing a vast region. He would keep his promise to govern faithfully until he could no longer do so, or until he was judged unworthy. Still, when Lee Wei looked at that family, he was filled with a steady emotion. From the point of view of other peoples, humans seemed fickle because they changed quickly. But the line from Bard to Brand, 3 generations, had produced unusually upright, talented people, adept in both civil and military matters. It was rare to see such steady succession. In such a household, with elders' guidance, the younger Bard was unlikely to go astray. Time passed. After Brand took over the region, Lee Wei's visits to River Valley City increased noticeably. It was as if he were conducting some inspection, and during this period, Brand handled everything without fault. But Li Wei had no intention of judging him. He simply wanted to see Bane, to see a junior of his own generation, the man who had always been a step ahead of him. One evening, Li Wei arrived at the familiar small house. Bane sat on the steps, lifting his head to study the complex sweep of the stars, lingering on the brightest star of Great Hope. After a long look, he rose and went inside, glanced at Li Wei, and then at the long untouched empty chair opposite him, one of the small rituals he liked to keep as the years thinned. A new empty chair had been added to that house, and it remained empty much of the time. Brand was often busy. He did not know what drew his grandfather and father to this modest place instead of the palace, only that when the palace at the highest point of River Valley City still lay damaged, their forebears had lived here. Nostalgia, perhaps. By Brand's time, the nostalgia had softened, but sometimes if he came by on a whim, he might find a solitary figure at the window, quietly brewing tea. 2 empty chairs would sit opposite him. "I, too," Bane said softly one night, "will be a step ahead in welcoming my knight uncle." In the year 3007, Bane passed away. Memories of old friends lingered around him, quietly settling, and Li Wei marked each of them in his own way, never forgetting. Sometimes he thought of Elrond. Did the elf feel the same way as he watched friend after friend and their descendants, those to whom he had given his heart, leave the world? Li Wei only shook his head and let out a long sigh that rang in the empty house. The following year, the massive figure that used to sit upon the rocks of Carltown vanished as well. Bjorn had gone. On the townsfolk's advice, his son Grimbeorn, also a skin changer, succeeded him as mayor of Carltown and as head of the Bayonne clan. Li Wei had known the child since his birth. He had been present when Bjorn held a feast for his son, and he had even held him once. He could not hold him now. By blood, the direct descendants of Bjorn were each enormous, true little giants. Bjorn in human form had stood over 2 meters 40 tall, and that would increase when he changed into a bear. His son was somewhat smaller, but still 2 meters 20. In time, as the line diluted, they would shrink. The power of skin changing would fade. Perhaps after many generations, the family would lose the ability to transform altogether, becoming only taller, stronger than average humans. "We have found some definite clues." Gandalf announced this as he passed through Roadside Fort in 3008. The hunt for Gollum had stalled for years, and Gandalf's attention had shifted elsewhere, especially after Li Wei showed him the ancient, evil things buried in the great snowfield north of Angmar. Those northern shadows had pushed the search for Gollum down the list of priorities. Still, this visit was not about the snowfield. "What clues?" Li Wei asked. Gandalf explained. "Gollum has been active near Mordor, coming out and then going back in. He's been bringing things into Mordor after he returns." "That's strange," Gandalf said, "but at least one thing is certain. He's still free. He's not captured by any party, and he has not fallen into the hands of the great enemy." He frowned. "It's dangerous. Wandering so close to Mordor every day, something will happen sooner or later." "We plan to restart the search for Gollum." Li Wei considered this. Gandalf spoke as if Gollum would be safe so long as he wasn't inside Mordor, but anywhere near Mordor was perilous. Capture by Mordor would mean something far worse than capture by rangers. A ranger would confine him and interrogate him, but not torture him as the enemy might. After a moment, Li Wei said, "I also know something about Gollum's belongings. I'll go too." Chapter 338, Cirith Ungol. That would be for the best. When Li Wei agreed to join, Gandalf breathed a quick sigh of relief. The man had been idle. If he could be put to use, why not? Li Wei asked for details. "Tell me everything you know. Be specific." "It's in Ithilien, near the crossroads," Gandalf answered. "To be honest, I'm worried. That area lies uncomfortably close to the Witch King's domain. If it weren't for recent reports, I'd have thought Gollum was already under the Witch King's influence." "Gollum is near Minas Morgul?" Li Wei asked. "Yes," Gandalf said. "That explains a lot." Li Wei smiled. "I'm familiar with that region. I even maintain a stronghold not far from the crossroads. And, Gandalf prompted. Li Wei hesitated and shook his head. "Never mind. I'm not entirely sure." "Not sure about what?" "I'm not sure if the orc chieftain there has changed, or if there have been internal shifts among them." Gandalf frowned. He didn't follow. "How does that concern us?" There are always odd things in this world, Li Wei said. Even among orcs, there can be individuals with strange motives, rare, unstable, but possible. Gandalf considered the thought. It's hard to imagine. Sauron's hold is immense. Even strong-willed men and elves struggle against it. Orcs are, by nature, twisted creatures. Most are little better than animals in humanoid form. A few exceptional individuals may only wear the skin of an orc while being other, older beings beneath. For an orc to resist Sauron, it's practically unheard of, but nothing is absolute. Strange things happen. Maybe someone's mind flips and never goes back. That makes sense, Li Wei said, and Gandalf, who had walked Middle-earth for 2,000 years and seen many warped minds, approved. He had met thinkers so twisted he suspected darker influences, though not always Morgoth. Some aberrations were simply that, unnerving. They discussed briefly and then acted. Li Wei left a day ahead of Gandalf, taking a shadowy route to a stronghold near the crossroads. From there he moved toward Cirith Ungol, the narrow pass just north of Minas Morgul, one of only 2 western approaches into Mordor. The other was through Minas Morgul itself, along the Morgul road that led straight into the realm of Sauron. Few from outside dared to use that road. With the Witch King posted there, everyone, even Gollum, would avoid it. Gollum had apparently stumbled upon Shelob while seeking a shortcut into Mordor and, terrified, had been subjugated into her service. For years, the great spider had been forced to feed on dried, foul-smelling orcs. The meat was meager and unsatisfying. Having Gollum, nimble and cunning, bring fresh prey was a boon, so Shelob treasured him. But this is where it all ends, Li Wei murmured, eyes narrowing toward the valley north of Minas Morgul. Gandalf and Aragorn did not know what he saw, but Li Wei did. Shelob, huh? Let's see what's happening. He made no effort to hide and strode toward Cirith Ungol. The orcs nearby, sitting in the grass, gnawing on maggot-ridden bread, looked up as a heat-wreathed figure flashed past. They froze, terror-struck. "How did he get here?" one cried. "Quick, go warn the chieftain." The orcs, as soon as they spotted Li Wei, decided instinctively to fetch someone stronger to deal with the matter. The message reached their leader, the crippled and foul-tempered chieftain, who snapped orders to his men. When his underlings still looked uncertain, he rose and roared at them. "You lot, what are you shivering for? He's not here for us. He's not coming for the Lord Witch King either, so what's the point of freaking out?" His shout calmed them. "That's sensible," one muttered. "Boss thinks quick." If the stranger wasn't after them, better to stay quiet. If they provoked him and he ran into Minas Morgul, braving the Witch King's shadow, that would be certain death. So for now, silence was the best policy. The orcs whispered among themselves, pleased by their leader's prudence. But while his men relaxed, the chieftain was anything but calm. As soon as their attention drifted, he slipped away down a back road, determined to follow the stranger. The wind pushed aside the murky dust of Mordor, and Li Wei frowned. The land changed rapidly as he neared the Ash Mountains. Grass and shrubs gave way to scorched, ashen soil. Charred trunks, black and lifeless, dotted the wasteland. If Sauron ever abandoned these lands, they would barely recover within an age. His corruption ran deep. Still, those were considerations for later. After a short walk, Li Wei reached the narrow, silent pass of Cirith Ungol and began to climb its worn steps. Chapter 339, Evil Spider Shelob Swish. The longsword spun, suddenly pointing at the figure behind him. "Lord, don't! It's me!" A panicked voice. Li Wei frowned and studied the orc who had been trailing him. This one was strikingly different. A noticeable limp, a prosthetic leg, and a steel plate bolted to his forehead. He was almost human height. Li Wei thought of Azog, the half-known leader from Moria and the Misty Mountains, who had also turned his injuries into weapons. Interesting. "Who are you again?" Li Wei asked, watching him closely. "You've changed so much. That's why you didn't recognize me," the crippled Uruk replied. "Lord, decades ago, my men and I swore ourselves to you. We were sent to our deaths, and only I survived. Now I command in this place. My loyalty has never wavered." The Uruk's words were fervent, but he knew his own history better than he let on. Before the Battle of River Valley City, he had only pretended loyalty to Li Wei, ultimately obeying the Dark Lord. Surviving that slaughter had unfastened some chain in him. Things had shifted. Li Wei sheathed his sword. The Uruk visibly relaxed. "Ah, I remember you now. Unexpected. I didn't think the one I once forced to carry a message to the Witch King would still be alive, and a leader, no less. You might be useful." "Have you seen Gollum?" Li Wei asked. "Gollum?" The Uruk blinked, confused. After Li Wei described the creature's appearance, the orc still shook his head. "Never heard of him, but I can keep an eye out, Lord." "Good." Li Wei told him a covert transmission method rangers favored, subtle, reliable, and one that wouldn't interfere with other rangers even if an enemy knew the steps. "I'll send someone to meet you. Do well, and if you come across Gollum, report it. Capture him if you can." "Yes, Lord," the Uruk said with conviction, then slipped away from the lonely Aigu, a place even orcs found forbidding. Hiss! From behind a jutting rock above the ravine, Gollum covered his mouth, his face a mask of terror. "How did he get here, Gollum?" he whispered. "And he even commands an orc chieftain." Gollum peered again and watched Li Wei turn and climb toward the cave mouth. Not good. He hesitated a heartbeat before retreating along the narrow path and slipping back into Shelob's dark cavern ahead of Li Wei. "Quick, get in here," he hissed as he darted through the tunnels. The huge spider, Shelob, stirred from the shadows. She looked at Gollum with hungry expectation. When he had no food, that look curdled into disgust. Gollum saw the change and began babbling, his big eyes wide with false contrition. "A terrible one has come, Gollum, very powerful. Even the Dark Lord couldn't handle him. If you meet him, you won't win." A long, low hiss from Shelob made him shrink back. That was displeasure, and Gollum took it as an opportunity to look pitiful and devoted. Footsteps echoed faintly from the cave mouth. Both spider and hobbit froze. "He's here." Ignoring Shelob's anger, Gollum slipped deeper and pressed himself into a hidden nook, silent and trembling. Shelob, who spent her days eating and brooding, snarled with disdain at the cowardice. The immense spider, larger than several men, propelled herself toward the entrance like a living, battering ram. Her thick, knobbled hide was tougher than many armors, and the hairs on her legs were like bristling barbs, tearing stone from the tunnel walls as she moved. Gollum's heart pounded. Maybe she could hurt that man. Maybe? A sudden, extraordinary cry split the air. "Roar!" The cave vibrated. Gollum clapped his hands to his ears, head spinning from the sound. Was that a noise a spider made? He wondered, frustrated by his own fear. Under the cloak of shadow, the colossal presence passed by, hunting and not seeing the crouched hobbit. "I've got good meat in my pack. Fresh, roasted steaks, lamb, pork. Pick what you like." Li Wei's voice floated past. He carried a greatsword in one hand and a torch in the other, the fire casting a gigantic shadow over the cave mouth. Gollum pressed himself tighter against the stone, every nerve straining. "Where did she go this time?" Li Wei muttered. He paused at a cave entrance where black ichor had spilled and pooled. He didn't need to be told whose blood it was. Without hesitation, he stepped into the cavern to search. Shelob had indeed struck hard enough earlier to bite at the Dragonflame's steel greatsword, costing it dozens of durability points. She was no ordinary beast. She possessed rule-level power. Her lineage made that plain, the daughter of Ungoliant, the primeval hunger that had devoured the two trees. Shelob wasn't her mother in might, but when she sunk her fangs in, iron and steel could suffer. Li Wei had been combing the cave system for over half a month. Several times he had nearly trapped her, only to miss by a hair. Once Shelob had even chewed through stone to slip away. The man with the torch had toyed with her like a hunter playing with a quarry, driving her to flee, wound, and rage. Each failed capture gripped her with humiliation as much as injury. Physically and mentally, she had been scarred. Li Wei moved deeper into the maze of tunnels, torchlight flickering on jagged walls and the black stains of Shelob's path. The hunt continued. Chapter 340. I don't understand. How can such a terrifying creature exist, Gollum? While Li Wei was probing the caves beneath Cirith Ungol for Shelob, Gollum seized the chance and slipped out. "We can't go back, Gollum. Those stinking orcs at the gate betrayed the Dark Lord. If they catch us, we'll be handed over to him. We should run the other way, into Mordor. It's actually safer than the lands outside, Gollum." Arguing with his other voice, Gollum made up his mind and darted east, plunging into the blackened plains. He had officially gone into the interior of Mordor. Cough, cough! As soon as he entered, the vile air hit him and he coughed. The pollution here was suffocating. Only dark creatures could endure it. Better than being eaten, precious. he muttered, thinking about where to hide. Then a huge rock suddenly blocked his path. Damn rock! How dare you stand in my way? Gollum kicked at it. The rock shifted, rose up, and became an ogre. A little snack dropped right into my hands, the black-skinned ogre rumbled, peering down at the tiny, trembling thing. Ah, no, don't eat us. We're nasty. We smell terrible, full of parasites, worms longer than your arm. Gollum shrieked, flinging lies and disgust to stall the ogre. The ogre recoiled and hurled him away, disdain carved on its face. The fall nearly killed him. What's all the commotion? A voice growled behind him. An Uruk captain and a patrol had arrived just then. The sharp-eyed captain fixed his gaze on the pitiful creature. Not one of our low orcs, and not anything I recognize. There's only one answer, another snarled. A spy from outside. Seize him. Bring him to camp for questioning, the captain roared. No, Gollum wailed, just out of the spider's den and straight into an orc encampment. He was truly doomed. Another half-month passed. Clank. The scrape of boots on barren stone. Leeway pushed his way out of the mountain and stood at the exit of the Cirith Ungol Pass, blinking at the scorched land of Mordor. He hadn't found Shelob, and somehow he'd ended up farther in than he'd intended. The spider had proven a master of concealment and of weaving. The sprawling caverns beneath the pass were thick with webs, some ancient and gray, others brand new and still stained with blood. The maze of fresh and old silk had nearly lost him. Fed up with wandering, Leeway had dug his way out through a narrow square shaft, about a meter wide and 2 high, cutting through the mountain's flank. He stepped out into the open, and an orc patrol happened along. Human, the sharp-eyed orc barked. Leeway turned slowly. The patrol froze, then recoiled as every orc's face went pale. Moments later, a war horn shrieked from Mordor's border. The garrison at the Cirith Ungol Tower began pouring out troops. The 2 monstrous sentinel statues by the gate emitted terrible shrieks that echoed all the way to Barad-dûr. A crimson beam ignited from the dark tower, stabbing through the black clouds. In Minas Morgul, sickly green lightning answered from the Witch King. The whole of Mordor was on maximum alert. Tens of thousands of orcs, several thousand ogres and beasts marched grimly along Mordor's roads toward the pass, while 5 ringwraiths rode the skies on fell beasts. Their mobilization was astonishing, but even so, it took days for the host to arrive at Cirith Ungol. When they reached the tower, the ringwraiths and Sauron, watching from afar, were baffled. The place was empty, thoroughly scoured. The 2 gate statues lay smashed. There was no army of the Free Peoples, no ambush, just silence. What did he intend? Sauron mused, vexed. Leeway had slipped alone into Mordor, bypassed the border fortifications, and destroyed the identification statues at the gate, then vanished. There had to be a motive. Sauron, meticulous and unwilling to accept a simple explanation, ordered the army to hold position. Do not withdraw, came the command. Establish camp. Garrison here until further notice. Mordor's western border was suddenly fortified like never before. Denethor and Gondor noticed the change immediately. That night, he called an emergency council and mobilized reinforcements from across the realm. Gondor, too, braced for war. The courts smelled of powder and tension, as if the smallest spark could ignite the continent. "Uncle, do you know what's going on in Mordor?" someone asked in the wide hall. Denethor frowned in thought. Beside him, Leeway stood with his hands clasped behind his back, expression unreadable. "I don't understand," he said slowly, shaking his head. He genuinely did not. How could a single excursion have provoked such a massive reaction? Unseen by Denethor, Leeway's hands, folded behind him, were crackling faintly, tiny sparks flickering where his fingers met.